Welcome, everyone, to Pacific Northwest Farmers Cooperative Market Update podcast for August 13th. I'm Trudi Allenbaugh. I have Lane Hannes and Shane Rebold with me today. Just take care of business like we usually do. The views and opinions of this program are of the hosts and are for informational purposes only. There's substantial risk in trading futures and options and should be carefully considered prior to trading. So, markets, last couple of days, lots of things to talk about. WASDE report yesterday and crop production. Question, did USDA get it right?
Great question. We will see as we move forward.
Right. One thing I thought was interesting prior to, and you guys probably all saw that prior to the report coming out, futures were up strong. We had lots of headlines about infrastructure damage again, Russia, Ukraine.
Yep.
And, I think that was last July's report as well. We kind of saw the same thing.
The last two WASDE days, we had big news out of the Black Sea about infrastructure being, dismantled there for their exports.
Yeah. So, that was like leading into that.
Really overshadowed what came out in the reports.
Yeah. So a couple of things, notes that I had in did, the USDA get it right? Just even talking about white wheat, and there's lots of corn and bean stuff to talk about too. But, world, globally, supply and demand with wheat, I think things were within some of those expectations. A few things that were a little bit off, certainly saw that with the corn and beans really kind of pushing wheat falling along from the infrastructure and the headline damages. So wheat by class, U.S. wheat production was trimmed by 5 million, hard-red spring lower by 2 million, winter wheat also lower, white wheat increased by 9 million, and my question to there is that enough?
Yeah, we're calling it 280 million bushels of all white wheat. So hard white, soft white winter, soft white spring, all and club. So, and the number in July was 271. I was going to do some research and look at, what our crop was in 2020, but I think larger. And I think we're probably going to be close to it.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that, last year it was production final numbers was 283. Yeah. And, we've just come up to 280 here from a 271 expectation.
We've got some room to grow.
Yeah, I think that number is going to get bigger. I really do. So there's one that we're already looking at. And then, looking at that balance sheet as well, U.S. all wheat, no real change in use. You kind of move the deck chairs around a little bit between exports and domestic or whatnot. But, that to me was a little bit, okay, so where do we go from here? So lower ending stocks as well. So anything else in the wheat numbers that stood out to you?
Yeah, looking at the world scale, and of course relevant to all the headlines now is what's going on in the Black Sea. What did USDA do for changes to exports from Ukraine and Russia? Between the two, they decreased the exports by 2.5 million metric tons, which comes out to about 4%. That's all they say they're going to be impacted. They gave an extra, they added 1 million metric tons of exports to Canada to sort of offset that. They said world trade altogether is going to be smaller. I expect the exports from Ukraine and Russia to continue to shrink. We are right at the beginning of their big export window. August, September, October is going to be when they export their most amount of grains. And there's some really serious fighting going on. They're not exporting anything out of the Sea of Azov. And right now, one of the busiest ports, Novo, is the one that's getting all of the shots fired at.
Right.
So 2 or 3 of those facilities have been damaged, and you can bet they're not loading that the way they usually load. I think in July they had 2.2 million metric tons of exports. Their average pace is over 3 million metric tons in July. So there should be some shrink there.
Yeah, and lots of talk about not only that infrastructure being able to do that, but then you get into the legalities of the ship owners, insurance. They're not wanting to go in there.
Yep.
They're saying we're not traveling in any of those ports. So you got to find a vessel that'll even go in there. Yeah. So that logistical problem ramification, snowballing. To me, it doesn't seem like it's going to get better. It's going to continue to, without some domestic ceasefire, true stopping of war happening.
Sure.
So
I think the only other thing I want to mention about wheat on the WASDE was there was no change to Australian production. Still expected to be 28 million metric tons, which is pretty close to their average. So even given the super El Nino and what that's supposed to mean for the southern hemisphere, they're going to do okay growing wheat as far as we can tell.
yeah, I thought that was, they didn't change the exports either. I think they're at 22. You already mentioned on that increase in Canada, decrease in U.S. and Europe. I think anything that happens on the nearby of wheat being sourced from somewhere else is going to be European, not U.S. I mean, so we're putting premiums on U.S. wheat, which rightfully so on some of our balance sheets with the hardwood winter production decreases, tight soft red winter crop, but at what point in time does demand shift to U.S., $1 million question.
Yeah, I think, as long as this has been going on, right, we already said it, since the last WASDE, when things really blew up, I haven't heard of anybody come to knock on the U.S.'s door and say, hey, we need some wheat.
Right.
So it hasn't happened yet. It's been over a month.
Yeah, I mean, and how long have we been trading the headlines of Russia, Ukraine, Iran,
Right.
I mean, everything. So the tail continues to get longer.
And it's still supporting our futures market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Absolutely.
There's a premium out there.
Yeah, so.
I can cover a few things on corn.
Yeah, let's switch over to corn and beans a little bit.
The big takeaway for corn, although they did not change the 26-27 crop year total production from that 16 billion bushel mark. Last year we were 17 billion bushels. This year's still going to be 16 billion bushels, our second largest crop ever. They did make some changes in the background, though. They lowered the yield by over almost, I think it's 2.5 bushels to the acre for the United States as a whole, but they increased our acreage by 1.2 million acres. I think that's the bigger takeaway is that increase in acres because it leaves the door open to bigger swings in the future in yield. And they are going to change yield from here forward.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about that earlier of the 5 biggest corn producing states had all decreases in yield on this report. And, there's a lot of time between that crop being harvested and trading the weather headlines or whatever. So my guess is if they're the top 5 producing states, maybe that, and it was a significant decrease. I didn't write down the percentage, but you're going to see that yield adjustment. So we did see increase in exports for corn, and rightfully so. It's been a healthy balance sheet.
Yeah.
Some would argue is, we're not doing anything in our pricing, even though corn has been trading higher to really limit demand. Is it needed with this? That's the only thing. If that yield is really there and wherever it gets harvested, we need to have a premium. I think corn futures are going to trade a little bit higher. Come around to the next couple of reports and yield.
You're thinking the same as the USDA.
Yeah.
They raised on-farm corn prices for the coming year.
Yeah.
By 10 cents to $4.50 from $4.40.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said about, and we've talked about it, corn is king and how that supports our wheat price. And I think that's going to be there prevalent, until some of these numbers, shake out a little bit more. But
they did something similar with soybeans, Shane, an increase in acreage there too.
Yeah, when we talked about that earlier about how they increased both corn and soybean acres. Instead of 1.2, it was 1.4. Did bump production up about 44, would they be that million bushels?
Yep.
A lot of that, 30 of it went into the crush margin.
Okay.
So
they're going to crush any more beans.
That's where they're going to crush margin.
because they didn't change exports yet,
No,
correct?
they didn't.
Yeah, okay.
Which is surprising, so that means that they've baked in this China number we've been seeing flash sales at almost every day.
Yeah, I've seen lots of flash sales. What does their total commitment look like versus what they're expected to take?
So currently they're projected at 17.9% complete on their 26 amounts of stuff they've fulfilled, or 50% is what we thought on the old crop, 17% on the new crop. So
So we've got a ways to go. But
but they're still taking a good chunk out of it. They'll have a meeting here in September.
yeah,
Everybody mind your P's and Q's.
Still
Yeah.
on as of today.
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
To me, this report was perfect for soybeans. It put its head down. It showed what the truth was and just keep marching on. Beans have got good strength. To circle back to the crush margin, we're seeing the same thing in canola. High crush demand. Crush margins right now are trading between 266 and 269. We topped out at a record at 350 this spring, which was an all-time record, but it was noted that prior to biofuels, just given a range on where they were at, was between 50 and 125 bucks. So
Okay.
strong demand, continued strong demand on the crush side, not just in canola, but soybeans as well. Everybody's crushing as much.
So do you think, and this is, I guess, the big ask or big question, but do you think that as that continues with, if we see China demand increase or hit that level, that should continue to keep those crush margins, higher as well?
Yes. Yep. I expect them to stay the same, if not grow a little bit. I know there's some more crush plants coming online, and they're still building a few more. So definite security in that market.
Could be some strength in our
Yes,
oilseeds
for a while.
staying for a bit.
Yep.
Even though we've, seen increased production, at least in our area for canola and globally. But sounds like that it's warranted if that kind of margin are there in the demand. So
Yeah. Keep on
that's
coming.
interesting. So
Yeah.
anything else under the production and WASDE that we missed? I think all wheat U.S. ending stocks was 7.7 million. All winter wheat production at 990 million bushels. That's down 29% from last year.
How about this difference between hard red winter wheat and soft white prices today?
Yeah, that's a good one. I was looking at that spread on the Chicago versus hard red, KC. We've seen that stay, it's a 70-cent range and widening. When we've had lots of headlines about the hard red winter production and how low that is, and certainly so. But I think we need to talk about soft red production. And if you look at this balance sheet and where the decrease in production acres and without the change in exports, it's lower, it's tighter. Stocks to use, what did you say, 30.5%?
For soft red winter?
Yeah. Hard red winter still at 49%.
Yeah, we're going to have half of it left over that we use this year.
Yeah, so I think that's, certainly something we got to keep eyeballs on. Let's talk about demand. What changes that? We've talked, this meeting coming up in September, we've talked a lot about China. What's different this year than 2020? 2020, we had huge demand in white wheat, soft red. China was that catalyst. So if China were to come in and buy soft red winter with that tight a balance sheet, that certainly is going to change that spread. If they don't, and the production number, where do we come in on our finished production number of hard red winter when it's all said and done? So definitely something to watch. What does that do for soft white wheat? Let's transfer this into soft white. What does that do for soft white wheat cash?
Yeah.
What does it do for basis? Right now, I think we've seen the cash price hold in there. Basis has moved in the volatility of the futures. We've been 15 above and 15 below in the last, month, just from the headlines. I don't see that changing a lot other than the fact that we see a big crop out here in white wheat. We're struggling with qualities that the exporter is looking for. We've seen scales come in place. Demand is going to be key going forward. I'm a little surprised that we've seen the cash price hold in here as well as it has. I think that is also a function of the headlines that we're trading. But, if that number changes and demand doesn't come to the front side, what does that do to our basis?
I think our white wheat prices are surprisingly high, in our opinion, because all wheat prices are high.
Right.
So support from other commodities.
What do you think about, what do you think about basis going forward into the deferred? We're starting to see a little carry in the cash price. Potential, guys, HTA in December, what kind of basis should we be looking for? Changes from what we've seen in the nearby?
I really still think the basis is going to struggle to be attractive for our HTAs. Our expectations should not be for 80 cents or a buck. 40, 50, 60 cents is going to look really good, I believe, just because of the inflated nature of futures right now. And that's probably going to continue until there is a resolve in the Black Sea. And with the size of the soft white wheat crop, cash prices are going to be facing strong headwinds.
Yeah, I agree. We saw it even coming into this this harvest, a little bit earlier basis was strong, and then we started seeing negative basis again, and it's really struggled from that movement in the futures. I think that the same thing's going to be, especially here in the next 60 days. You'll see that in that nearby, and even with some carry in the cash market, you'll have an opportunity. Some of those higher level ones are going to look good. Others, will manage through that a little bit.
I do want to talk about one strategy really quick, and that's our flex contract. Of course, that involves selling a call option. And over the last month, futures volatility has been really high. High volatility leads to high options prices.
Right.
So for something looking at 2027 crop, a September at like a $7 level, 60, 70 cents.
Right.
That's something we could look at if you're interested.
Right. Not only for old crop, but even potentially a HCA into a new crop
Right.
type situation
Now,
when you see
again, volatility's high.
Right.
So we don't know what our futures prices are going to look like in 2027.
Right.
There's a good chance that it turns into an HTA in 2027 if volatility stays this high and prices want to move higher then.
Right.
So there is risk associated
Yeah.
with getting that 60 to 80 cents.
Yeah, but I like that looking out there and taking advantage of that volatility and that prices being higher. Maybe locking in some of those levels and seeing where these futures go. But it's a good strategy to look at. Seems like buying a call is going to cost too much, so maybe selling them from next year is a better strategy.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about we talked a lot about the proteins. We've seen scales happen. Let's talk a little bit about what our buyers, what they're looking for, some of those percentages.
Sure.
Our crop this year, in the Northwest is right now looking sub 9% protein. Our inelastic demand buyers, they want between 9, we'll say 9 is even 9.5 to 10.5 protein.
Yeah.
Why does it matter this year? Because that protein is not available.
Not only is the average sub 9, but we have a lot of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Okay, and I did some research on this, wanted to see, we've got all this data from Figus. They inspect all of our export vessels, and you can go download this data, and it'll show you the name of the vessel it's on, how many pounds went out, and all of its grade factors. So over the last 10 years, I pulled that data, looked at protein specifically, and I was able to break it down into some brackets here. 11% of it went out at 9 to 9.4. 45% went out at 9.5 to 9.9%. 24% went out at 10 to 10.5. Below 9%, if I add this up, it's like 3.5% of all wheat exported in the last 10 years had a protein less than 9%.
Right.
So that shows you where the demand for our product is at. It's 9.0 to 10.5. We don't have that supply.
Right.
We have a supply of sub 9 without demand. That's why there's discounts.
Right. Discounts are there. The market, we'll find markets for this grain, but our buyers, our normal buyers, that's not where they're looking for. So as we finish up this harvest and get through the proteins and know where we're at, that's going to help. I mean, exporters too, they're out there looking, they're trying to find buyers for this product. But
I think we will, because you look at this data and you go, okay, typically the crop is 9 to 10.5%. I bet over the last 10 years, if you go look at all of our, I forget which agency does the harvest summary, but they'll give you the average protein for white wheat, and it's probably 10%.
Yeah, I looked at a 5-year average, and I think it was 9.9% average. So,
close.
Right, that's why this, you have the anomalies, and that's when things are off, because just like the high protein year or the falling number year, and now
We
it's
did
the
sell
low
the high protein stuff.
we did.
We found places for it to
Right,
go.
correct.
So is our demand 9.0 to 10.5 because that's the crop we usually have, or is that the product they want?
Right.
We'll find a way to work through the sub 9 crop.
Right. Absolutely. So not all hope is lost, but it's going to take us a little time to.
But if you're a buyer in Southeast Asia, you've got to go buy higher protein from another origin.
Right.
So you can't fork up the normal cash that you would for the PNW crop that's under 9.
Right, absolutely. So, and that's what the scales do. That's what the movement in the price will do is find those buyers and where they have to source this other protein.
Right.
So, a lot of crop is a good problem to have. Even if it's sub the protein we want, it's just going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So.
Dilution is the solution.
Yeah, exactly. So going into outlook, that was kind of it as well. Kind of look for us to be, if we're starting to see some harvest pressure. I think that's, going to be going forward here a little bit as we finish putting this crop away. Looking for the demand, seeing what those values are. Basis, I think, is going to continue to be as volatile as it has been. I'm still under the assumption or a feeling that we're going to have China buy some U.S. wheat. Talking about what we were they're probably not hard red. It's going to be too high priced. Soft red, it shouldn't be cheap either. Maybe we do sell some white wheat, and that helps this balance sheet get a little thinner. So I'm not going to count that out just yet.
Right.
They bought it in 2020. They might buy it this year too.
Yeah, it's a perfect shoe-in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on the topic of basis, this is going to be a perfect moment to have orders in.
Right.
Because it's going to be based off of volatility. That's when we're going to see those good numbers.
Yeah.
Get those orders in, get them ahead so we can watch them.
Yep, absolutely.
Don't behind the
Yeah.
baseball.
Good point.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.